I'm told that I should pause a little bit at the beginning of this episode on account of the fact that the last time we went live, the first 13 seconds of the program were cut off. So, lest I be hasty or precipitous or otherwise in a rush, I have now spent enough time. This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. So, Father Bonaventure, in our most recent studio recording session, by most recent, I mean our only studio recording session, we recorded a bunch of different episodes, but it created a problem that we hadn't encountered previously, which was the problem of determining how to have, contemporary small talk at the beginning of an episode that you're recording before a variety of events had actually happened in your life.
Yeah.
So it's really opened the box for us as to how the beginning of these episodes should go. And you came up with some really excellent ideas. So I don't know if there's a particular idea that you're looking to vet in this episode or an oldie but goodie that you're looking to return to.
I love word association, So if you want to play, I'm ready for you, my friend.
Oh yeah, sure. Do we alternate, or do you just go a bunch and then I go a bunch?
I think I hadn't tried the alternating one. You want to try that?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, I'm going to say ballpoint pen.
What's the other one? Fountain pen. That's the first thing I thought of, but it was conceptual. It wasn't actually. Never mind. Keep going, Father Gregory. Chai tea.
Dominican sisters?
Ooh. All right. Okay, you're up.
All right. Stamps.
Stamps. I think of the tobacco shop. I think that's like based off an old wives' tale that you have to get stamps at tobacco shops in Italy. Maybe not true. Regardless.
Was that from your time in Italy? Living there as a boy in the 1950s?
Yeah. I did some oldie-timey things in the oldie-timey old country. Okay, here we go. Relics.
Creepy. I just remember, because I'm a convert, and I remember most of the thing I'm game for, and relics, I'm getting there. I like them. Actually, I have a sweet Sister Faustia, one of the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy, gave me let me borrow a Dominic de Guzman and Padre Pio, who would have thought these two saints would have been together, relic. So, hold on, and check this out. Oh man, check this out. Faustina, she's got a little one there, so I can hold. Everyone grab relics and hold them in front of the camera. Yeah. So anyway, I was in novitiate with Father Gregory, and we were visiting Zanesville, and St. Thomas Aquinas. Is that the parish there? Yeah. And Father Pius Petrick was giving us a tour of the thing. I was the only convert of 21. So, and he said, "Does anyone want to see relics?" And everyone said, "Yeah." And I thought, maybe. And so everyone rushed up to the altar. You remember this? And he pulled a box from under it, and he was like holding up, and he's like, "I have Newt, hair of Joseph," whatever. Like everyone's holding up, and it was incredible. And it was the only time I'd ever thought to myself, "It's all true. Everything that they said was true." So I don't think they're creepy now. It's just the first association because of that scarring memory of it's like a flea market for relics, it seemed like.
Yeah.
But that was great. It's really, relics are beautiful, and I have, like I said, we have many of them we're holding. Some of us are wearing them, that kind of thing.
The great thing about word association is you can just send it out there, and then you can explain. No, I don't really mean this. This is just what I thought. It's just like a pre-rational notion. It's not been like pushed through the virtue filter, so you don't have to worry about it. So
yeah, that's great.
But like, I don't think that. I may have had at a particular time, but I don't identify or associate with that individual anymore. So we're good.
Yeah, that's right.
I was recently in Nashville visiting the Dominican sisters there, and
chai tea.
I was recounting a story. Savage. I was recounting a story. Okay, so when we came to Washington, D.C. in 2011, I went over to St. Dominic's, and there was an older friar there who was close to death, Father Jack McMahon. And the prior of the community brought me into the room there with a couple of other brothers to like pray, say goodbye. And I offered him a third-class relic of St. Thomas Aquinas that I had in my pocket, which I think had been given to me by my mother. And he's like, "Nah, I have a first-class relic." I was like, "Wow, put in my place. Good to know."
Relic slaying.
Yeah, exactly. He passed away maybe 2 days later, and then at his wake, right? So for the Office of the Dead, the prior of the community came up to me and gave me a first class relic of Saint Antoninus of Florence, and said, Father McMahon wanted you to have this, and I was like, oh man, incredible. I ended up giving that to somebody in the order who had taken the name Antoninus and had left.
Does he
And
still have it?
he does still have it, yeah.
Oh my
But it
gosh, I
was
feel so I
his
love it.
sister who I was recounting this story to, his blood
Yes.
sister. And she was like, I was given this first class relic of Saint Dominic recently, and I had it on my heart to basically share it. And I didn't know with whom, but I suspected maybe with you. So here it is. So
That's what you got. That's what you're holding up.
That's what I
Wow.
put up there. First class relic of Saint Dominic de Guzman, who's kind of a big deal.
Oh, he is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really cool. That's a
It
great.
is really cool.
She's a great sister. I know who it is, and that man is a great man. He's great. He's got a great family.
They are a great family. They did great things.
Fist pumpingly great.
Love.
Fist pumpingly great. Yeah.
All right. So the great thing about Holy Father Dominic is that he, in the general chapter of 1220, he helped to solidify the Dominican constitutions, and he was, obviously influential in choosing the rule that we would abide by. And in that rule and constitutions, there are a variety of things demanded of Dominican friars that they must obey, which leads us to our topic for today. It only took us forever to get there. What are we at now? Like a billion minutes? Yeah, we're at a billion
6:30.
minutes. Yep. So whatever.
It was fun though. It was fun.
It was great.
There,
So the theme for this particular opening salvo is obedience in everyday life. So Father Bonaventure and I often have conversations about the fact that he is predisposed to obedience, whereas I am predisposed to the opposite. I don't know what the substantive form of that disobedience, I guess, is the word, libertinism. I usually just say, I'm going to make a prudent choice, and then I do whatever I want, and then I call it prudence afterwards. Whereas Father Bonaventure is a man who believes in the prima facie bindingness of the law. Whoa! Who wrote that book? Unbelievable. Nice little plug there. Didn't even see that. So Father Bonaventure, if we're thinking about prudence in every, if we're thinking about obedience in every, we're thinking about obedience in everyday life, right? Regardless of state of life or regardless of age, time, circumstances, setting, whatever. What are some basic principles that we can put in place so as to think well about the theme and live well as obedient sons and daughters of God? Get us started.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, obedience is, central act of the will, you could say, or an act that one does. So submitting to another, to obey, to come underneath someone else, and and I love that. I love that. I think because it's the fundamental creaturely virtue, right? Because we are dependent upon another for everything. It seems, at least our being, which is everything, because everything that's not being is non-being, and that doesn't exist. So God is the creator and governor of all of that. And so obedience is, I would say, the rational response to one's creaturely status. And that then works out as being obedient to the ministers of God through this sort of thing. So I think obedience gets a bad name because it's against autonomy or my freedom. Freedom and obedience are seen as being opposed to each other, or prudence and obedience, this sort of thing. So you might pit, for instance, like this book against, say, this book, Diary of Faustina or something, because she talks a lot about obedience. And you can decide which one you think is a better book in terms of saintliness or whatever. But you don't need to do that. I think obedience is a freeing thing, not because it frees you from making decisions, but because it puts you underneath the command of God and underneath his will, and it subordinates your will to another, which, at least in our human terms, is good practice for our divine relationship, because really we are subordinate to the will of God, because God's will for us is our good as well. I know that's not being obedient to, say, parents all the time, even though most of the time they might be just wrong about what the good for you is, but the intention there. So I love the intention of obedience as submitting one's will to another, the will of another, and that other being eventually down the line, God, who does desire our good in all these things. And therefore obedience is the only way to really get it. That's one way of saying it.
Yeah. And I think that you get at the root fear for a lot of people. I think a lot of folks, a lot of us, fear that if we are obedient to another, then we open ourselves to being controlled and manipulated by someone who isn't so much concerned with our good as they are with whether power or pleasure or use or some other end, which is, while noble within bounds, is not the most noble, and as a result of which is not something that has like a supreme claim on our life. So we feel ourselves just kind of getting pulled into the plans of other people and kind of tossed around or tossed about in a way that doesn't respect us as human beings of an infinite worth, right? Of a real estimable dignity. And so we try to carve out a space where we feel, autonomous, where we feel like we can exercise our liberty. And then we insist on, defending that space, whether by rights or by other means. But I think that, maybe one of the fundamental spiritual dispositions that we bring to this conversation is that of, having an open mind and an open heart. The word, so audire is the word with which the rule of Saint Benedict begins, which is often translated as just like listen. But there's this sense that in order to enter upon a program of life, or in order to endeavor some, like worthy course of action, you need to be open. Because while you might have good ideas, those ideas will always have to come in for correction or criticism if they're going to be perfected. And you yourself are going to have to adjust. So that means being open, being docile to those who have lived through it, who have suffered through it, right, who have aged through it. And not necessarily that you're going to have those type of wise people in your life, but that there has to be this fundamental openness to receiving from reality, or to like learning, I guess, from reality, so that you don't become closed off in this kind of active insistence upon your own autonomy or your own freedom. Because at the end of the day, getting what you want isn't always what we imagined it to be, or isn't all it's cracked up to be. Because oftentimes when we're open to reality in a more radical way, it makes of life more of an adventure than we could have previously foreseen. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I don't know what you think further about, maybe some of the spiritual applications thereof.
I think one of the spiritual applications is building up the virtue of humility. I think humility is such a central virtue of the spiritual life. We just, without being humble, we won't be able to enter the kingdom of God, right? And there's kind of two ways to get at humility. It's race. One is humiliation. So like attempting to do something and realizing you're dead wrong about it, for instance, and getting embarrassed and all this, and you realize that brings humility. But it'd be nice if you could get practice the virtue of humility and be strengthened in this without humiliation, without you making a mistake, you could say. And I think that's what obedience offers you the ability to do. And it's not like, okay, now I'm going to be obedient to every single thing that comes my way. You have to practice it with let's see, number 3, prudence, sort of thing, with your reason. But the more you practice obedience with those around you who are to be obeyed, and because of God's providence, his life circumstances, everything can be a situation to be obedient to through his ministrations, then you can practice the virtue of humility without humiliation. And since humility is something, our lowliness, our meekness, the kind of, the principles of the Virgin Mary, you could say, her particular virtues, they can be given by grace, of course, and infused in this sort of way, but they can also be acquired with working with God's grace and working with our situations. And humility, one way is the via negativa, the kind of humiliation, but the other one is obedience, to see and to lean into it, not see obedience to someone as a matter of, I guess I have to do this so I can do something else, or because otherwise I'll be punished. It's like following laws, right? I'll do this. I only do this because it'd be better for me, but because I do this because I'm asked to, I'm commanded to, I'm supposed to, and I realize that another has a claim on me. I am not the captain of my own ship and my own life, and that's true. And so it's good to live in that truth and gain the value of humility and practice in the small things, such that when a bigger thing comes up, you're able to actually access it. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, and I think that helps us to broaden our appreciation for how humility is at play in ordinary life, because I think a lot of people think of it in terms of like the express law. Like, here is a law that has been promulgated and now I'm bound by it. And as a result of which, I need to render my obedience unless I can identify some way in which the law is unjust and therefore not binding. And I might expend all kinds of energy in just such a task. But in a lot of traditions of religious life, you have different modes of obedience, right? So there is that kind of obedience to an express law, but there's also obedience to an implied law. There's obedience, like a kind of obedience whereby one presumes the permission of the other on account of the fact that you have an habitual trust or an habitual understanding. Sometimes you'll refer to perfect obedience, where you have a very deep, deep sympathy with the desires, with the thoughts and desires of a competent superior, which, you recognize as in some way mediating the very thoughts and desires of God for your life. And I was talking with a religious sister recently, and she was saying something that she had learned maybe 25 years ago. And she was saying, if you find yourself in the context of a communal situation and you feel like your talents aren't being used, or they're not being like appreciated and, put to good serviceable application, she says, don't fear that they're being wasted because they're consecrated. And I think that's like part of the genius of obedience in the context of religious life, is the idea that, if you consecrate the very faculty whereby you choose, your will, then it makes of the acts of that faculty something beautiful or something holy. So not only do you do the thing for virtuous ends, but you do the thing as a kind of oblation of self. And then it makes it more so beautiful and holy. St. Thomas has this description of the vows, and he says that with obedience, basically you offer what's most intimate to the person, because you offer the soul, right? You offer the interior life. You offer what we've described as autonomy or freedom, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that has wider application beyond the bounds of religious life, obviously. And certainly I've seen this, in the context of marriage, just observing my sisters and their husbands and the way that some things are asked, like stated directly, and the way that some things are kind of anticipated, the way that some things are kind of bargained through. It's fascinating. But ultimately, it's about affirming the love for each other and for their children, so that ultimately they can affirm in and through those relationships their love of God. I don't know what you think about that.
It's obedience in everyday life. Again, I think the idea that it just pops up at some point, and otherwise I'm not obedient. I'm just, as we wouldn't describe ourselves like that. We're always obedient. It's a question of who we're obeying at any given moment. And there are different people that call for obedience. Ultimately, virtue, in a sense, is an obedience to the law of God and God's love and His life for us. And so that comes through in these different situations. And your spouse who asks something of you, and you've committed to her or him, all of a sudden that becomes something that now is to be obeyed, but out of charity, because of the good that it does for you, for these things. And to look for, I just think we tend to not be attentive to obediential opportunities, because we just don't like this word. I think, especially as Americans, and we just think it's old-fashioned, or it's something we should move away from. We don't like hierarchies. We don't like institutions. And we should be okay as even Catholics realize that this is just the water we breathe in. This is stuff we're growing up in. So we might not like to be obedient. Now, if you love obedience, then you might think you might be obeying too much. But no such thing is possible. So you'll be okay.
Man, I thought I was going to hear a humble admission right there. Father Gregory often calls me out on this particular theme, and I'm learning a lot. Nope, full send. So cheers to you. All right, with that, then we're going to seamlessly transition to questions that have been submitted or posted on various social media outlets. So ordinarily we go with questions on our Patreon page, mixing it up a little bit this time, but we'll circle back to Patreon patrons at our next most convenient opportunity. That's a non-committal way of saying maybe next time, probably. All right, here we go. So, is it wrong to seek education with regards to the faith, meaning higher education wise, that is post-grad, etc.? Should we rely on biblical knowledge alone or natural knowledge? Also, how does one maintain the meekness and littleness of a child while seeking knowledge? Kelly. Father Bonaventure, you're a philosopher, so you're a real researcher. You're a real academic, whereas I myself am less so well-defined. So what are your thoughts?
You're the same thing there. Yeah, that's a great question. Is it wrong to seek education with regards to the faith? No, of course not. Now, I study Pietists as my main tradition, so they would say be careful. And just like the Franciscan tradition, of course, says, make sure you're not going too far away. What hath Jerusalem to do with Athens? This kind of thing. So you could become over-rationalized, but as Dominicans, we believe that and you can only love what you know, and knowledge of God gives you more ways of loving Him. It gives you a more full concept. Think of it like you've unveiled more that you can hug with your mind. you know? So it's like you're realizing it's bigger and you can hug more of it, more contact with reality through knowing, therefore loving. So knowing and loving. So it's always good to do education on that. I think there can be a danger of the snootiness or over intellectualism, or this feeling like everyone needs to be a theologian, you could say. So everyone needs to be Father Gregory Pine, or not many people are capable of that. So at least a little bit under him, so I can understand what he's saying. It's not true. You can be fine. It's okay to just love the Lord, of course, but to know some basic things about him, so that to inform your prayer. The question is, when you're seeking education, I would say higher education of the faith, what is it for? Just for knowing things that you feel good about it, or does it actually inform your prayer life? When you meditate, when you think about the Trinity, have you studied the Trinity such that it opens up ways to communicate with God, or Scripture study particularly? So the end has to be union with God, and therefore the education is helpful because it allows for again, more expansive intellectual hugging. But you might just learn those things and not take them to prayer and use them in that union with God. That's the first shot I've got for that. What are you do the theology stuff and the loving hugging thing. So go for it.
I have nothing
tips of the trade, you could say.
Question, which was excellent. I would just say that not all institutions are equal, which Kelly. So when you choose a place at which to study, you need to ensure that it's a place where theology is conducted in faith, and that theology conducted in faith tends to love, right? So theology is a strange science because it doesn't rest just in things speculated, but it passes ultimately to things, embraced, as Father Bonaventure has very beautifully described. All right, so let's bop on then to our next question. I've heard conversations about, quote, the divine counsel as explained by Michael Heiser in his book, quote, The Unseen Realm. I've heard he is generally a reputable scholar from Catholics and Protestants, but this specific idea sounds problematic, at least from what I've heard of it. Can you explain the concept of it is sound? Do you know anything about that?
I mean, from the Protestant background, the divine counsels is the logical manifestation of his decrees. So at least in the Protestant tradition, there's a Reformed tradition, there's a real debate. Catholics get excited about stuff. Protestants get excited about God's decrees. And because the question is, does he decree salvation before, after the fall? So you're supralapsarian, infralapsarianism. So you have lots of divine counsels, which is basically a Protestant way of saying the divine plan. In the mind, and it matters not temporally ordered. It's not like God is in time, but how he's ordered logically the moments of decrees. So when he's decreed to create, decreed to send Jesus, decreed to save, how do those order? So that divine counsel is used in that terms. And if he sounds like there's a Protestant Catholic thing, that's the frame I go to and sort of thing. So it's how God's thoughts and how his providential plan is developed and then explicated, and it does make a difference. In some ways, what those counsels look like. So I suspect that's I know divine counsels through the Protestant language, and I don't know this author particularly, whether he's a Protestant that Catholics also read, but I don't think it's not generally. I don't know, you check me on this. Doesn't sound like it's not a Catholic word I tend to come across, God's counsels, divine counsels, but it is in the Protestant world about the decrees.
Yeah, my knowledge of Protestant theology is very superficial, and I've never come across the notion until tonight. So thanks for the question. It is encouragement to study further. Boom. It would seem that man only has one vocation, as one man cannot serve multiple roles. Either a man is a cleric, married, or is dedicated to a religious order. It is improper then that a married man be ordained a deacon, since he cannot participate in more than one vocation. What would St. Thomas say to this? Robert.
This is you, my friend.
This is
my thoughts on this, so you take
well, it. Well, my thoughts on this, because I think our thoughts are pretty similar. So we're just going to be honest with you. Well, not being scandalous, but the permanent diaconate, which was revitalized at the Second Vatican Council, I think that we would agree in saying that it's still working out its own theology, or that the Council Fathers laid the groundwork for a theology of the diaconate, but that theology of the diaconate is still in the works, right? It's still being teased out, or still being, standardized maybe? I'm in search of words, but I'm failing with flying colors. So you're right to notice the fact that the diaconate is strange, because it's defined that a diacon that the diaconal order pertains to the clerical orders. Okay, so it is an ordination. But it's also interesting to note that when a deacon is ordained, the power that he gains, okay, by virtue of the sacrament conferred, is a power to do things in the ordinary course, which can be done otherwise in the extraordinary course. So a deacon, ministers at the altar. He reads the gospel. He is sometimes invited to preach. He can witness weddings or be like the principal celebrant of a wedding ceremony outside the context of Mass. He can preside over communion services, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there aren't too many things to add to that list, but those are some of them. For all of those things, there are extraordinary circumstances in which a lay person can be delegated, deputed, or otherwise permitted to do just those things. Whereas when one is ordained to the priesthood, there are things that a priest can do which a lay person most certainly cannot do, like, celebrate the sacred mysteries. So there's something there about the diaconate which seems to suggest that it doesn't impart character in the way that the ordained priesthood imparts character, because that character is for the giving of divine things, and it's connected especially with the sacraments of the Eucharist and of confession. So it's about, the priest is a mediator insofar as he offers to God the prayers and sacrifices of the people, and then he bestows on the people the gifts that come forth from God. And you see that in a very intense or peculiar way in the priesthood, and then furthermore in the episcopacy, which is referred to in the tradition as the fullness of orders, whereas it's not so clear in the diaconate. And so I think it's a lot of these kind of tensions in the theology of the diaconate which remain to be teased out. And you point to something that's very helpful. So like when a man is married, he's in his state of life. He is in his vocation. And so like the wife, for instance, of a man who was ordained a permanent diaconate doesn't have to say like, well, now he's found his vocation. No, he found his vocation when he married you. And there's nothing about that life that needs improvement upon, all right? Because it's a sanctifying life, and that God calls all the Christian faithful to the perfection of charity, right? Regardless of rank or status, says Lumen Gentium, paragraph 40. But there are further things that I left out, which you can tease out, Father Bonaventure, in clarifying commentary.
Well, I don't know. It is, when I was in the Episcopal Church, we always talked about confirmation as a liturgy in search of a theology. And I think you're right. The diaconate has a sense that it's in search of a it's not quite figured itself out. It's got its sea legs, Interestingly enough, of course, it's one of the biblical ordinations, you could say, that we have laying on of hand or hands in the New Testament. So you have this mention of deacons. They're not doing anything the deacons are doing today, basically. But of course, the married priesthood, so the vocation to the priesthood, although currently is juridically defined as being an unmarried man, you can have married priests. It does happen. I've seen it. I don't recommend it, but and not religious, of course, consecration. But like there are so I don't think the deacon, the married life, is as you were pointing out, isn't exactly the key core issue here. It strikes the vocation thing, although that's confusing too. But it is that the deacon, the calling to the diaconate, especially because if you're a married man who's a priest, in the strange circumstances, there are a few of them because of Anglican orders and such. There's a conflicted loyalty, I suppose. And the deacon, it just seems like this is what everyone is, married deacons. So it's really bizarre. So it turns out the exception becomes the rule for that. And that's a little strange. But I think it's good to have at least one belief de fide. And for me, that would be the diaconate. So we're good to go.
There you go. You heard it here first. All right, last one from social media before we pass to those questions that have been submitted in the context of this live stream. Jay asks, is there any inherent difference in the feminine and masculine spiritualities? Initial thoughts on the basis of St. Faustina or otherwise?
Well, experientially, there certainly must be. Because reading anyone who's done this, who's read like female mystics versus male mystics, you get a different feel. I think women are, just experientially, women show up to church more than men. But it's true even in the mystical writings. Women have a sense of an espousal love of Christ that men don't have in the same way. I think that's significant. So Catherine, it's not surprising that some of the great mystics of love are women. So Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, Saint Faustina, of course, others. We could add more to this, not too many more, but we could add some more. Whereas men tend not to be. I mean, they have Saint John of the Cross is profound in this way, but it's a weird masculine kind of love, like the nada, just nothingness. You're just feeling it, which is great. Feeling the void. So just from anecdotal, you could say, and experiential church history stuff, there's a sense in which women have a different spirituality. It's not un-Christian or something, or different, but it is different. And it's in some ways is more profound. I think that's why most of us read female mystics, because we get an insight into a particular love of Christ. I have lots of thoughts about this on a deep philosophical level, because I think women and men have different souls. But I would say that,
really?
yeah, you got to, because
No way.
yeah, they do. They do.
Really?
It's okay. It's not a different species, because with humans it's different. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, because they've got different functions and bodily and generational capacities and relations to others. Yeah. So I feel like this comes from not just an accidental thing. Like, it turns out women just are brides of Christ and men are like his instruments. But I think it has to do with like a deep ontological kind of fittingness of their souls based upon form, anima dot form corporis. So that kind of,
Fascinating. All right. I don't think I'll add too terribly much to that, except that, wow. All right. You think that men and women have different souls?
Well, we all believe they do have different souls, but I mean, like, different types of souls.
Yes, it's like different speciated souls.
Right.
It's
Subspeciated.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has to be different in some meaningful or determined or specific way, and not further speciate humanity into
Otherwise,
two
Christ can't
philosophical
save
categories.
them. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because then we got our well, all these things, but also
do.
when reading, have you read Edith Stein or whatever, Saint Teresa Benedict of the Cross collected writings on women?
Yeah, this is where I get it from.
Okay, perfect. All right, because she gestures there, and as I was reading that, I was like, "Are you saying?" Because if you are, so I have some follow up questions, but I don't
She
know if those
clarifies
fall
stuff.
within the scope
Yeah.
of this particular thing. Because yeah, that's a big ticket item. Because I mean, in the Thomistic school, it seems to be the case that one would insist that differentiation comes via matter, not in a crass way or like a reductionistic way, but that on account of the fact that they have a different, like bodily nature, that their souls would reflect that difference, or that there would be a kind of resonance of the differentiation in their corporeal state,
Yeah.
in their spiritual state. And I know what you're thinking when it comes to that, because etc. All right, so we'll just have another live stream on whether men and women have the same souls, and we will not fall into crass gender stereotypes. It'll be exciting, so stay tuned. All right,
we'll fall into crass gender stereotypes probably, but yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry. So Katie Parker says Bonaventure. I don't know if you noticed, gentle viewer, that Father Bonaventure is Father Bonaventure in this. Katie Parker works for Godsplaining. She does a tremendous job setting up everything, executing most things, and making it go. So cheers to her. And she says, "Come on, I'm cracking up. Devastation Station." All right. So I can't pronounce this word, so I'm going to call him Raz Al Ghul for obvious reasons. Have you ever been making a holy hour in an adoration chapel, which is deathly quiet with other adorers, and your guts decide to gurgle and churn and squeak and wallow and slosh about quite noisily? Answer: yes, Father Bonaventure. You don't eat.
Yeah, if I had this experience, I mean, yes, but not for like long periods of time, enough to kind of give the look around and like who's rumbly, and then it ends. My experience, but yeah, I have had that experience, or at mass, or at prayers, for instance, meditation. In meditation, for us, it's more meditation sort of thing. And you're sitting next to you, you feel bad for the guy next to you, and you're like, maybe I just should go and eat something quick, but I've got to say mass before this, so you're gonna stuck with the rumblies. Don't know what to do about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Father Bonaventure and I don't know that we've ever sat very close to each other in choir for an extended period of time, but
Just
when you sit in choir,
1 year, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, in the Father Vincent Ferrer Bagan section.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. Oh man, what a time! That was a great time.
It was a good time.
So you become accustomed to the habits of those in whose proximity you are seated, and so you pick up on these things, like who has coffee breath and who has regular showering habits and things like that. But stomach grumbling is one of the more hilarious and lighthearted of exchanges, so generally encouraged, never discouraged. All right. Me says relics are creepy. Thanks for saying Father O. You are now Father O for
great.
Bonaventure. Laugh out loud. Here we go. All right. How does obedience play into human suffering and its purpose? Since God the Father did not spare his son, but saved Peter in prison and allowed James to be beheaded, as well as John the Baptist. So it seems like he's saving some people, he's sparing other people. How are we supposed to make sense of this? Do you want to start? You want me to start?
Nope, I want you to take. You're the theologian.
Father Theologiaventure over here. So I think whenever we ask these type of theological questions, we're inquiring into the wisdom of God, the depths of which we cannot sound. So the types of arguments that we're giving are not going to be necessary arguments typically. They're going to be arguments of convenience. So we can see how it's fitting that God act as he does in the world, because in some way it reveals his glory or conduces to the salvation of our souls. So in this particular case, like, why does God not spare some and spare others? I think here we'll return to essential feature of God's kind of interaction with creation, namely that God doesn't go about creating for the purpose of a bland egalitarianism. God's plans are differentiated by design. And why? Well, I mean, there are many reasons for which, I suppose, one of which is God is simple. And when we say simple, we mean undivided. So we mean so abundantly being, true, good, beautiful, right? That there's no shadow of division within, because he exhausts all that there is of being, and so too of unity, truth, goodness, and beauty. And as a result, when God kind of translates, or when God, what will one say, kind of constricts or delimits his divine life so as to, give life or impart life to creatures, it's always going to be limited instances, or it's always going to be like ways in which his life can be participated, but not fully. So there's no created thing that can exhaust all that there is to be said about God. And so God creates many different things so that by the kind of joint testimony or ecosystematic harmony of all creation, you can come to a deeper appreciation of who God is and the work that he is about. So God doesn't spare and does spare. It's not because he is arbitrary or inconsistent. It's because he's about different things in those different works. And when we inquire into each, we find that there are good reasons for which. They may not be revealed at the moment or even, in time, but unto ages of ages, we have the opportunity to seek and to find, to knock, and to have that door opened. So that's just like a basic sketch, but you have other things to add, I imagine.
No, I think obedience is to, you obey the law, of course. But in terms of salvation, because there's a particularity to each case, and especially to the apostles, but to our lives as well, obedience is can be a response to an individual summons. And so, as Father Gregory was mentioned, I think you're right about that. It's different for different people, because God has different plans and different workings, different relationships with each individual. So that, for instance, Peter doesn't set a standard for, okay, when you're in X situation, obedience looks like you will stay in jail. He's not looking for a law to then rest and say, all right, I'm only obeying the law. And turns out the law of being jailed as a Christian is that you never get out and you get beheaded or something, right? No, it turns out there is no particular universal law that says this. There are general patterns, you could say, because of human sinfulness that are responding, but that God's revelation, these are revelations from God, are individually tailored, so that obedience is something that you have to be practiced and attentive to. It's not like you get used to obeying a particular law. Like, for instance, I don't, when I come up to a stop sign, think, oh boy, should I stop or not? It's just by nature, I naturally stop at stop signs no matter what. And by grace, I stop at every stop sign no matter what time of night. But it's a settled habit, you could say. But our relationship with the Lord is not always settled habits. A lot of times it's situational. He needs to inspire you to do something particular. And that's true of the apostles, it's true for us. And so obedience will look different in how these situations work out, because he's got different plans with them.
Boom. All right. Hallelujah, who is present on most Catholic live streams on the internet, says Father Pine Twofer. We chatted last night on a different channel. Great to chat tonight. Cheers to you. Wow. Thanks for coming. Jeremy Walkenford says, hey, everyone. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy.
All right. Tis I says, hey, Great handle. Holy smokes. You just knocked it out of the park right there. Out of curiosity, why is the podcast logo a dog? Does anyone know? Ra's al Ghul responds, I believe it was St. Dominic's mother had a vision of birthing a dog that ran around the world and it was prefiguring the spread of the Dominican order. Exactly.
Right.
Also, cool little word trick in
Mhm.
Latin. Dominicans are referred to as Dominicanes. Domini means of the Lord. Canes means dog. Dogs of the Lord. Boom. Yep. And the dog in the vision had a torch in its mouth as well, which is also in the logo. Double boom. Tizai says, thank you. Didn't know that. Also, thank you at Dawn. Guys, this is awesome. All right. Talitha Coombe, who recently attended a Godsplaining retreat. Great to see you. Wifely obedience is the best because I hate choosing what I want to eat. If it was the wrong choice, is made not only, if it was the wrong choice, not only did I not have to choose, but I am also cleared of responsibility.
By winning.
That is
Yeah.
true. I mean,
Yeah, that's
awesome.
true.
Actually, more seriously, she says, if Adam had said, nope, no apple, put it down, what would that have meant for the fall?
Ooh.
Great question.
That is cool.
That is cool. So theological speculation on this is vexed because of the biology that was kind of available at the time, or au courant at the time. So St. Thomas has something to say about like who makes the biological contribution. He thought it was entirely the man who made the biological contribution. So in his estimation, original sin would still have been transmitted. Nope, it would not have been transmitted if Adam had not fallen. But on account of what we know biologically, even though original sin is not, like it's not through the biological contribution, but in a certain sense, it's dependent upon the biological contribution, we would say, yes, it would seem that it would be communicated. At least that's what people seem to suggest in the 20th and 21st century. Not that everyone comes to good conclusions in the 20th and 21st century, but insofar as you're reasoning upon better biology, I think you're better disposed to furnish a good answer. Father Bonaventure, interpolations.
Oh, I don't know. I read that question as like, she grabs the apple and then he says, nope, put that down. No apple. You. But I don't, but then the question is like, ooh, was it it's not the eating, because then it could be like, oh, unless you want to play like super hard Eucharistic analogies, like the mere disobedience of the will. So in some ways it would have been, it's your scenario anyway. He would say, nope, we're not doing that. Because she would have still disobeyed even if she hadn't, that sort of thing. So she's done unless she doesn't, if she has it in her hand, game's over. But he's probably good. Yeah. But I mean, the thing is, it is fascinating. The speculation around this, the early, the fall is tricky because like, what's the snake do? He gets punished to not have legs anymore. Snakes don't have legs. What's going on? A snake talks to you. Were the other animals talking? Was this just like, and if so, what's going on there? And where was that? What was he up to? Was he around for a while or something? No one. Rife for speculation. But why do we speculate at all on any of this stuff? I think it's kind of like science fiction. Why we watch science fiction movies or read fantasy novels, not because they are science fiction, the events, but because it opens up the imagination to possibilities that we otherwise would not be willing to be open up to understand the depths of sin and the depths of this. So you could just kibosh speculation on this kind of situation, or you could go in for it hardcore and just get super excited and waste a ton of time, or you could just popcorn it for a minute and just twiddle it around in prayer a bit, and then head back to it.
One thing to add is this. So original sin is not something new in the soul. It's the absence of something that was there. So man, like our first parents were created in a state of rectitude or original justice. So they were created in grace with these different aspects that kind of flowed from the life of grace. So by grace, their minds were subordinated to God. By integral nature, the lower powers of their soul were subordinated to their minds and hearts. And then by like certain associated privileges, their bodies would have been subordinated to their souls. And that would have meant that they were impassible and immortal, etc. When they commit this sin, they lose grace, and then they lose everything that hangs from grace. And so effectively what original sin is it's man and woman are left to themselves. Okay. But they're left to themselves after having been graced or after having been blessed with original justice or rectitude. So they retain the memory of it. And in losing it, there are certain kind of, what would you say, like furrows that are plowed in their different faculties, right? So now they suffer ignorance and malice and weakness and concupiscence. So it's as if they are left to themselves, but in the process, they incur these wounds. So if one of them were to have incurred a wound, then they would not have been competent to communicate the life of Christ to their offspring if they weren't able to do so as a couple, is like the basic idea. So but the good news is that it opens us up to the prospect of redemption in Christ, which is awesome.
And the good news is, Ophios Copa. They both Adam said, looks good. Give me that.
Pass it over here. All right. Emily Matienzo says, peace, Father Gregory and Father Bonaventure. Thank you for speaking on obediencia, the most challenging of the evangelical councils. Our joy. Thanks for your comment. Thank you for vocations, and may God richly bless you and all religious. Silly question. How tall are you both? I saw a YouTube with Father Gregory, and you seem really tall.
He is really tall.
6'3" and 1/8 of an inch, but I typically round up to 6'4" because I think most everyone in the world rounds up, or most men maybe do. Also, my brother's 6'8", so I have to round up to get closer. Father Bonaventure?
Did you you round up from 6'3" and 1/8
1/8 of an inch? Yeah,
wow.
I give myself an extra 7/8 of an inch.
I am 5'10" and a half, and I always round down. Which is fascinating. That's the difference between
obedience and prudence.
No, because I don't know if that's, but it's because I always feel like someone says, it's the come up higher principle, right? Like you sit at the top of the table and someone says, oh, friend, go lower, but come up higher. So I feel like if I say 5'11", someone's gonna say, nah, you're not 5'11", and I go, yeah, 10 and a half, and they're like, you piece of garbage. Whereas like 5'10", you're like, no, I'm 5'10", you're a little higher than me, and I'm like, well, I might be 5'10 and a half, I guess, but I always round down, and they're like, oh, you rock, and then I'm like, no, I don't, but I'm still 5'10 and a half, so it's good. That's fascinating, the rounding up. Yeah, most people do round up. I round down for that. We don't need to psychologize anymore on that if we want, but there it is.
We could.
He's much taller though. The rest of the hour. Most Dominicans in our province, at least recently, have been giants among men. And Malachim or something or whatever, we seem like grasshoppers to them. Is that the
Nephilim?
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe say Malachi. I don't know. Anyway, I'm no longer a Protestant.
I just verified on my driver's license. It says I'm 6'3". Also, it's going to expire in June of 2024. So something to look forward to.
Hey, so your license.
All right. Tis I. Chirps back at Talitha Coombe in a lively way. Cameron McCoon says, good suggestion for acts of consecration or acts on consecration of obedience when a layperson is in a tough job. Yeah, I mean, like our general go-to, this is like a Godsplaining favorite recommendation, is the practice of the presence of God, or recollection. So when you're at your job, you're going to be thinking about, you guessed it, your job. But that can be a certain temptation, or it can pose a certain temptation to become forgetful of God. When you recall God's presence, you're able to introduce your life, specifically your work life, into the presence of God in a more intentional way, which I think goes a long way towards sanctifying the work. I don't know, Father Bonaventure, thoughts?
Two things. One, I think it's good to visualize that. Father Gregory was really good on this, but all of Christ's life is sanctifying. All of his acts and his passions, his sufferings, and his actions. And so think about to visualize and to let his sacred humanity from the Garden of Gethsemane, when he says, not my will, but your will, to see that and kind of feel like you're next to him. And when you're in a tough situation, tough job, the kind of the grinding that might be there. And the other thing, of course, is St. Faustina, just Jesus, I trust in you. I find that to be, if you can feel that, if you can say that, it might mitigate some of the difficulties of following something you don't want to do.
Boom. All right, Jeremy Walkenford, I think you're going to have an answer to this. What book would you recommend for a friend who is suffering from not having a theological home? He was raised Pentecostal and now goes to a Baptist church with his wife, but doesn't agree theologically with the Baptist church. Father Bonaventure?
I mean, Mere Christianity is just so good. I can't tell what you're exactly looking for in this case, whether it's like a thing to get him through, like, is it a spiritual study for replacing church, or is it just like a theological richness, feeding the mind so that you can love and hug larger things, hug more effectively. But C.S. Lewis, it's back. C.S. Lewis, though, is great. Mere Christianity is great. And just anything C.S. Lewis, because if you disagree with C.S. Lewis, you just disagree with God, as far as I can tell, on most things, right? It's just hard to go, you know what, because he's just so pleasant. It's so reasonable. It's mere Christianity, so that anyone basically can factor this in. Yeah, he doesn't talk about the co-redemptrix, the mediatrix aspects of the Virgin Mary, but okay. Or relics. Okay. but he's got everything else. So it's a good theological base camp, you could say, before you wander off to the heights of glory. So Mere Christianity and anything by C.S. Lewis, I think, is really, really fruitful, both intellectually and spiritually.
Boom. I would do something different because I want everyone to be Catholic yesterday. Not that Father Bonaventure doesn't, but I am less patient, I suppose. And so I would suggest The Light of Christ by Father Thomas Joseph White. It sounds like your friend likes reading books. It's a book that's like a good little introductory apologetic to the Catholic Church. If he's looking for a home, I can tell you where he can find one. You also might look at Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn, which kind of details his spiritual journey as he made his way towards the Catholic Church and ended up there. All right, Veronica Tellez asks, at what point does obedience to parents end? Great question. My first thoughts are, I think some of it has to do with where you live, okay? Like if you live at your parents' house. Some of it has to do with like financial arrangements, whether you're dependent upon them for your support for college or for like working through your debt or whatever it might be. Some of it too might be culturally mediated. I know that like the apron strings are longer in some cultures than they are in others. But
what?
I think that, what's that?
The what strings?
Apron strings? You never heard that?
No. I love that though. The apron strings.
Yeah, kind of like being tied to your mom, tethered, indebted to your mom for her opinion, her support, etc. So the fourth commandment always applies, right? Honor your father and mother. That always applies. But love will take different shapes or forms depending upon your state of life and how you kind of mature and progress through it. So my general thought is once you're out on your own and you're paying your own rent and you're working through your own college debt and you're making your own life decisions, I think that if your parents make seemingly unreasonable requests of you, then you're in a position where you can say no. But then there are other ways in which, you can be honoring or loving your parents where it might not come formally under obedience, and that might be appropriate. Like say like one of your parents gets cancer and you live 1,000 miles away and it's like a bad form of cancer and they're going to die. You might like what the other parent might say, you might consider moving back home just to have the time with him. And then you might say, okay, so it looks like obedience, but truth be told, it's a different arrangement at that stage. I don't know. You have thoughts to add?
No, that sounds, it's all in the particular details. I think you should err on the side of when you're under the care of your parents, of course. But the reason why you're obeying them is because obedience will be for your good, not because obedience qua obedience. This is obedience qua obedience seems like to me a virtue, but Father Gregory has helped me to see that obedience qua obedience is not the key virtue. So obedience qua obedience is no good with your parents. Obedience qua love is, but don't take that to, don't take that credit card and start just charging up the wazoo on it. Whatever a wazoo is, I have no idea.
Who does know? Talitha Coombe says, oh, she was joking about the last comment, which Father Bonaventure and I picked up on because of past experience on the retreat. So cheers. Gleaming Flute, do you think dogs are holier pets than cats? This is awesome. Whew, here we go. Do you think dogs are holier pets than cats because they are better at obeying? I think an obedience school for cats would go out of business quickly. So I'm allergic to both of them, and as a result of which, I think that they're both spiritually bankrupt. Father Bonaventure?
Yeah. So Gleaming Flute, you are dead on. Cats are Satan. Yeah, cats are like Satan's children. No, I know everyone's like, well, I love my cat. The thing with the cat, the dogs, let me just give you a quick layer, is like, if you die, your dog will wait and die with you. If you die, the cat will eat the food that's left there, and then it'll eat your face, and then it'll go. And the question you got to ask yourself is that the thing that one should do to one's owner? Should one die with the owner or eat his face? And I think the answer is quite obvious. So yes, I don't think cats are their own animals. Willfully disobedient, you could even say, you might. But then again, I was predisposed to dislike cats from an early age because we just never had them around, and so they always seem like stupid things to me. But they're really easy. They're fantastic. I can see why people have them because you don't need to do anything. You just have to make sure it doesn't eat you, which is, it's small, so they're good. That's all I got.
That's a lot. That is a lot. All right. Talitha Coombe, can't wait for the Different Souls episode. Can you add Dame Julian of Norwich in this? Her writings were crazy, but I think she backs up Father Bonaventure's theory in her style. Boom. David the Hermit says, thank you. Cheers. Vincent Chiavarini says, what is the more appropriate response when a friend tells you they are pregnant by means of IVF? It feels awkward to respond excitedly, but yet also awkward to respond in a somber way. That is a great question. I would make like Saint Therese and just ask him, do you need a refill? Which is to say, I would walk away. Yeah, because you don't want to encourage the fact that the baby was conceived via IVF. But it also is a done deal in the sense that it can't be undone and that the act itself is past.
Not morally.
I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, maybe a muted kind of like a, oh, that's good. Yeah, it's real good. That's good. I guess that's good is probably the right answer. No, I don't know. No, I mean, you live in a situation where people don't see. It depends who the person, right? One, how do you know? Like, I mean, did you know them close enough that they might? So if you know, it's not like, guess what? Guess who's got an IVF baby? Most people aren't interested in that. We might be getting to that point, but I don't think so. So the context of knowing them, if they already know, for instance, your position on, if they know you're a devout Catholic, for instance, then it's probably, you don't need to like rub it in again, this sort of thing. Yeah. You can just be happy for them. If someone is just literally going up to you and saying, hey, you're a Catholic, guess what? That's so great, but by IVF, I have a baby now. And it's like, are you asking me? Then it's an open invitation to say, well, I guess that's okay. That's great. I'm happy for you have a baby, but why are you so excited about this? Why are you so excited about the IVF thing? Turn on. But I think it really is about context of how you know them, how you know this. As long as they know, why that you're in favor, that you're against this sort of thing, you're a Catholic. I don't think there's any need to, especially since they're probably not coming from a Christian or a Catholic background, to rub it in or anything like that. I think sometimes we have to just suffer through their ignorance, and find the right times to say things. But you're not gonna be like, yeah, you probably shouldn't have done this. And they go, oh, I guess we'll just give it away. I mean, that's what I would say. It depends on the context of you knowing them and who they are.
Yeah. I would say too, like, okay, so in the case of the ignorant, you're responsible for instructing them. And in the case of the sinner, you're responsible for admonishing them. And I think that what we've seen more and more in the 21st century is people policing the discourse. So they're trying to set the terms on which you engage with them. So it's like, if somebody comes up to me and like looks like a woman and says like, hello, my name's Sandy. I'm like, hello, Sandy. If I later discover that that person was born a biological male and transitioned to become a woman, I'd be like, oh, weird. Right. But I wouldn't feel like done wrong to in that particular encounter. But if a person who looks like a boy and identifies as a woman comes up to me and says like, my name is Sandy, my pronouns are her and she and her, I'd be like, why are we doing this? It's like, you're trying to tell me how to talk. And so if somebody were to approach and say like, we're pregnant, I'd be like, cool. But if somebody were to approach them and say like, we're pregnant, you're a Catholic priest, we did it by IVF, what do you think? It's like, I mean, what are we doing here? Like, why are you laying trap?
Take that. Yeah.
Is it like, is the world just not a safe place until you have made everyone conform to your mode of discourse? So I think that's what I find troubling, is when it's kind of done in a way that's violent. But that's probably for another conversation. All right, we got time for minutes.
Yeah, IVF's tough because we're at a point where it seems it's such a great good to have children, right? This gets back to the obedience and providence matter. It's such a great good to have children, and this is a way that you can have children. So why in the world wouldn't God want you to have children, like in this situation when you could, at this point, people? So it is a tough one, and you can't solve those issues immediately. So just realize that there's affirm the good of having children in there, and realize that it's gonna be hard sometimes just to make clear why you wouldn't do this. I think there's a lot of confusion about that.
Yeah. Great point. All right, here we go. Hugo Donahue says, I'm an RCI and I am finding it difficult not think/worry about whether I will marry this incredible Catholic woman in my life. Any spiritual guidance on obedience, staying on Catholic growth? Yeah, I would say, I mean, you're going to worry. It just happens, but you don't have to worry about worrying. I would just say you treat most of these worries like the way that Saint Teresa of Avila treats distraction in prayers. You're like, oh, there's a worry. Okay. Moving on, right? You just try to kind of remark that it is and then pass on to the consideration of the thing itself. So in the Christian life, you're thinking about God and you're thinking about your neighbor. In this case, if it's the woman that you're dating or hope to date or whatever it is. But you're not obsessing about ways in which you could be potentially derailed because they have no existence. And as a result of which, they're not an object of contemplation, except in the most remote and paper-thin way, which is like, why do that when you can think about God? It was as thick can be. Quote, out the wazoo, end quote. Quote,
They can
more
be.
to hug, end quote. So there you
Yeah.
go. Greatest hits.
Yeah.
Father Bonaventure, thoughts on that?
Thick as thick can be. I love that. That's good. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of things to be worried about. I think anxiety is something that we're just used to, and it'd be better if we just sometimes said, Jesus, I trust in you." You know, as long as I'm going to mass, I'm in the sacrament, you're an RCA, then okay, you can trust the ordinary means of grace that you're receiving, and trust that if you're discerning this, then you'll be okay. I mean, we can be so fearful today. I think of like, is it gonna be just the right? Nothing's just the right. Nothing, but you obey.
Bingo. All right, here we
Yeah,
go. So Tis I is 5102 #sweet. Don't know what that means. Thank you, fathers. What's your favorite book? Says Tis I. Oh, including a U, which means you're British, which accounts for the fact that you have an awesome handle. One of my favorite books is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. Father Bonaventure.
Oh man. Oh, on the spot. Diary of Saint Faustina.
Bingo. All right. Frank Sheed, better than C.S. Lewis, says hallelujah. Cheers to you for Catholic apologetics. She clarified.
Under that aspect, of course.
Jeremy Walkenford says, I also round down from 5'10.5".
Jeremy's my kind of guy.
Father Bonaventure's twin. Before the fall, animals did not eat each other. That is contested.
Like it.
St. Thomas seems to suggest that they did. Repeat comment. They are Christian and take their faith seriously. I don't remember
the IVF stuff. This is the IVF.
Oh, that's the IVF stuff. Yeah. Got it.
That's great.
All right, but they aren't Catholic, but seem to think contraception or IVF aren't that big of a deal yet. So that comes more into the ignorance thing than it does into the kind of malice thing. And you can weigh the comments that we gave previously in accord with that. If you could ask anyone in the world, past or present, to be on your podcast, who would you invite? Father Bonaventure?
Saint Faustina.
Oh my God, you are consistent. It's incredible. I would invite St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe because he has a lot to say. And he also has like some pretty savvy ways of saying it. So cheers to him. One of my kids, Maribel Andrade, says, one of my kids asked me today as we were studying the sacrament of marriage, what if the church requires you to marry freely? Why, if the church requires you to marry freely, it supported arranged marriages? Great question. I don't know the history of that. Father Bonaventure, do you?
Is she a sister?
I don't know.
Maybe that picture. Oh, kids probably like teaching or something. Why, if the church requires you to marry freely, it's supported? Well, I mean, I don't think there's. You could still marriage can be arranged, and you could still say, "Hey, yeah, this is great. I go for this obedience sort of thing." So it's not like freedom is not that you have the full control over every single fact of it, because no one's free in that way. Because guess what? You have to eat and breathe air. You are not free to live and not breathe. Therefore, you are bound. No, so it's all better. So that's. Yeah, weird conception of freedom to think that you have to be free in all these things. You have to be free in something to be discussed later in a debate and a discussion between compatibilism and incompatibilism and Thomas Aquinas and John Duns Scotus. But we'll get that later.
All right. Last question, Joseph Clark. Did Christ ever laugh? And you get Chesterton think so at the end of Orthodoxy. Last words in that book were, and I suspect it was his mirth. So cheers. Hallelujah sends prayers for everyone. Thank you so much. Cheers to you as well.
Yeah.
All right, we're wrapping up, folks. Thanks as always for listening to Godsplaining. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think we're opening up a TikTok account, so Father Bonaventure can. I don't know what one does on TikTok. I think you dance to viral songs, so look for that in the future. Like the episode, subscribe on YouTube or your podcast app. Leave a 5-star review, unless you can leave a higher one, and then please do leave that because we're a sucker for stars. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, please follow the link in the description or in the show notes, as it might be. There you'll also find links to shop our merchandise, which we just updated, and to get information for upcoming Godsplaining events. Spoiler alert, there are no upcoming events right now because we haven't scheduled them, so don't bother looking for that. But know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we will catch you next time on Godsplaining. Cheers.